Well, today we're looking pretty much at what kind of future does church in general have, and Binkley in particular. Right? The issue of what future can there be for the church, given what's happening nationwide, which basically we're going through right now, what Europe went through 20 to 30 years ago. Right, where there's mass exodus from the from churches of all times, and so we're facing that right now. And so, what do we do about that? Right? Let's take a look here. A couple of questions that we had posted in advance. Right, one, what future can there be for the church with a smaller and smaller percentage of young people attending any church, and let me just do that, put that on my screen so I can see it without having to strain my neck. You see, what future can there be for any for the church with smaller and smaller percentage of young people attending any church and many adults leaving the church? What needs to happen for the church to survive? And so we'll spend about half our time looking at that question. And then a follow-up thing is, given the shift that has occurred over the last generation in what the term Baptist means, two things related to that. One, what is the significance of progressive churches continuing to use that term or that label? And second, should we use a different term to distinguish ourselves from the fundamentalists who have become the predominant users of that term Baptist? So let's take a look at those kind of one at a time. Given the reality that people are leaving the church in droves right now, and this is well documented, by the way, and I just it helped if I updated your screen, sorry. The Pew Research Center, a few years back, 2022, did a study on this. What's happening with demographics in the United States and the church. And they had a couple of things to say there about what they found. They said if recent trends in religious switching continue, Christians could make up less than half of the U.S. population within a few decades.
Specifically, define religious switching.
Yeah, that's a good question. That took me a while to look at what they're talking about too. But they're talking about a combination of things. One, people switching from one religion to another, and the other, people switching from being a part of a religion to not being. Right, and so it's kind of both things, but given how much that is happening right now, they estimate that by 2070, right, Christianity will be a minority in the United States. That there will be less than half of people who are still attending church by that time, and so they're just on the speed of two things right now. One, attendance dropping in churches and churches closing. And I was kind of blown away by the number of churches per month that are closing altogether in the United States, just shutting down, selling the building, right? And I was like, whoa, and I don't remember the number right now, but it was a much higher number than I would have expected, right? And so
it's in the thousands each year, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another comment they made is that since the 1990s, large numbers of Americans have left Christianity to join the growing ranks of U.S. adults who describe their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. Right? So so the switching could be from being active church participation to just nothing in particular, right? And they're just not affiliated anymore. So given this reality, what must progressive churches do to adapt and to remain relevant enough to survive? If we want Binkley to be open 50 years or in 2070, what has to happen? And so I don't have a script to tell you what needs to happen. I'm just opening that up for us to have some discussion around what do you think? Good morning and welcome.
So a couple of questions before we get to that.
Uh-huh.
Can I use that?
Yes, you can totally use that.
What's it over here?
Other faiths,
Uh-huh.
I assume they're going through the same
Yes.
kind of thing. Is that true?
That, they didn't get into that a whole lot, but I suspect it is. I suspect they made the comparison to Europe and how we're a few decades behind Europe on this. But that rapidly, the number of people attending having any kind of faith identification is decreasing at a pretty alarming pace, and so what do we need to do? And that is a wave that seems to be coming, right? And is well underway. So what do we need to do to make sure there are people still coming
Yeah.
by 2070?
The thing that, I don't know if you've ever taken a trip down to Grace Church or Church of Lowe's, as I call it.
Yeah,
But those churches seem to be
yeah,
doing well. I mean, they're bucking the trend somehow. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm not sure it's an answer we like, but I think
Yeah.
maybe the answer partially lies in what are they up to over there?
yeah.
I think it's that calling it not being specific, Baptist, this and that. Most of those churches, they call themselves non-denominational, but they're still
Yes.
churches of faith. Of course, I've
Yes.
attended a lot of them.
And we are going to get into that too. There's a lot of, and by the way, the first churches to start to do that were not progressive churches, to simply delete their denominational affiliation, right? And many of them still belong to that particular denomination. They just took it out of the name,
I don't see.
right? Yeah.
So that you don't recognize it. Then
Yes,
when
right.
you walk
Yeah.
into it, it almost the same.
That's right.
I've been to so many different ones, but
Yeah.
when you walk in, it's not Baptist, it's not this, it's not that, it's just church.
Yeah, right. And so they've tried to get what does it look like to be in a Protestant church? I mean, it is different from going into a Catholic or Episcopal church, right? But many of them have gone to this kind of non-identical. Some of them have talked about removing the branding,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That they look at denominational titles as brands, right? In a marketing sense, and they say they're better off without the brand.
What's
Right.
kind of funny though is some of those places have such specific branding
Oh
to
yeah.
the extent where like some of those sermons are just like
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
made out of like cake batter and
Yeah.
and they just
There's
like
a-
pass them
There's
on.
a template. They're just
It
putting
is
things
really
in.
kind of scary.
Like
Yeah,
gospel
it's its own
prosperity.
branding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't see, that what's happening here is similar to Europe. I mean,
Mhm.
there's some similarities, but gosh, they have the history of religious wars and
Oh yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Holocaust and all kinds of things that have driven people from the
Oh, that's
church
true.
and
Yeah.
sector.
So we at least
And-
don't have that
And
history.
then, for Christianity in general, more than half of Christianity now is in what we call the global South, in
Mhm.
Africa and Latin America
Yes.
and Philippines and so forth.
Right.
So it's a big shift from the church that was centered in Europe and the United States.
That's a really good point, because this exodus is not happening everywhere. It's happening in the United States,
Yes.
right? And so
But
you
it does
do
tend to
have.
be the evangelical churches that are growing. And
Mhm.
You don't know.
evangelical churches in
Grow.
those countries.
But
I will also say, I think whenever I have attended some of these non-denominational type churches, they have a different way of worshiping
mhm.
that appeals to younger people.
Yes.
Or it's You come
Yes.
in, it's not so, so what I'm looking for.
Formal.
Formal. It's,
Uh-huh.
you come in, the little small tables and they have coffee and they're sitting there and you still have song and praise, you still have a minister speaking,
Right.
but it's just a lot more casual.
Yes.
And I
right.
think that has an appeal to certain
sure.
groups of people.
And I think to their credit, a lot of those churches, they're doing some serious work in looking at what works for younger people and then implementing that in church.
Yeah.
And I know, independent of their theological perspective. I mean, they're very conservative churches doing this, they're very progressive churches doing this, and they're succeeding because they're paying really good attention to the demographic issues of what do the young people respond to, right? And not in terms of the message so much as in the, like you're saying, the environment. When they come into the church, what is it they're expecting? What feels welcoming to them, right? And I think, so we are eventually going to have to start paying attention to that or fade away, right? And so we might look at what are we willing to tolerate on that? What are we willing to do what adaptations are we willing to make? But
One of the things that I really feel, especially with the 40s and the 30-year-olds, is they want to test drive. And so the Zoom meetings, whereas we're here, but they're also here because they're
Yes, right.
zooming in and identifying with what you're talking about, and they're putting in the chats
yes,
what they're saying back and forth. Then they feel like they've test driven the church and got
Yes.
a feel for, is this somewhere I want to go?
yes.
And
Well, that's a
A
great
lot
point.
of the
That's a great
churches
point.
are saying international now, because those who aren't even here in America
Yeah.
are zooming in
Yes.
and, being a part of the conversation, the ministries, what
Yes.
have you.
Well, an example of what I was saying about how you have churches across the spectrum doing this sort of stuff. One of the mega churches, that phenomenon of these gigantic churches that have thousands. I mean, 70,000 people, on a Sunday morning. It's ridiculous. But to me, to even think about, that, how can that be church? But it is for a lot of people. There's a huge church out in Texas called the Saddleback Church, right? They just, within the last year or two, got kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. They were Southern Baptist, right? But they took it out of their name. They named the church something that didn't include Baptist. You could do a little digging on their website, and after 3 or 4 clicks, you could find that they're affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Right? So they were a Southern Baptist church. They were kicked out of the Southern Baptist church when they started ordaining women. Right? And so they have women on their staff and they're ordained women. And so they've moved in a more, how to say, more culturally diverse direction in that sense. But they started out by removing the word Baptist right from their title, and now they still identify as Baptist, but they're not Southern Baptist.
Well, it's interesting because, we were kicked out and so was Poland, but it was over the gay issue.
Yes.
And I'm not aware that in the North Carolina Baptist Convention, would they kick out a church for having women ministers?
I don't know about that. I don't know. And so I've
It's been a while since we've been in.
It's been a while since we've been there. Yes. So I don't know what they would do, but anyway, it's an example of how they're not all those mega churches are the same. They do have substantive differences between them, but they've all figured out something about how you get young people to participate in church.
We are just out in Texas, in Oatmeal, Texas, just outside Austin, and the church there that's doing really well is called the Cowboy Church. The first thing they built was a rodeo arena.
Oh, my goodness.
And they got place for people's RVs to pull in. It's church like I've never seen before.
My goodness.
Whatever works.
I mean, yeah.
The cowboy
It's
church.
Texas.
Yeah, it's,
I can understand that.
Yes, in Texas, that seems like, around here, that probably wouldn't fly, but, but,
Do
but
you
in
know
Texas.
what is the success of the format where, like, where a church will have two services? Where they'll have like a
Contemporary.
contemporary and then a
Well,
traditional.
we have some churches right here in town that do that.
Yeah, and to
yeah.
me, it seems like the people that go to one service have no idea of the people that go,
Yeah.
it's like two separate congregations that
And
are.
it can become that
isolated
way.
from each
I
other.
know United Church of Chapel Hill, where
Mhm.
I was a member for a number of years, has that. They have a contemporary service early in the morning.
They did.
Uh-huh.
They don't anymore.
Oh,
just
really? They
took
don't
off.
anymore? I didn't know
They
that.
only have the morning service.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, okay. Well, they, for a number of years, they had that contemporary service in the morning and then a more traditional service at 11 o'clock. And the way they addressed
What's
that
Lisa?
question is they put the church school hour between the two. And so both groups of people, their hope was, would get to know each other through being involved in different classes. And they may be attending different services, but they're going to attend the same classes. And so
Thinking of the radio, I think we should just go ahead and declare ourselves the Tar Heel basketball church.
it's just,
Well, I don't know, there might be some people, Susan being.
Yeah.
we lose the Durham people.
I think because I'm not as keen about the traditional church styles.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I like coming for the 9 a.m.
yeah.
inner
Yes.
place. I think I've seen it there, and that, I like that, and normally I would go there in a Sunday school class, and I probably won't go to the traditional service.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there are a lot of
Different
people
styles.
like that. I think we here in Binkley tried something early in the morning, but it wasn't like what they were doing at United Church, which was a full-blown service in the sanctuary, but just very contemporary, right? And so we didn't quite go that far, right? But the strain that a second service puts is on the ministerial staff. You know, because they've got a much longer day, you know, and they've got to do two different services, and it's not easy, right? And so you're asking a lot of them to do that, but it's what a lot of churches have done in order to stay to increase their reach into the community, right?
I attended Grace.
Yeah.
And they call them small groups, and you get involved in the small groups, and that was the morning, the small groups. They didn't call them Sunday school classes. They
Yeah.
called them small groups.
Yeah.
And the groups decided each season what they were gonna do, talk about whatever, it was a group. But they still had their main service because they were piping their main service in from Elevation Church or something.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
they still have their main service at 11 o'clock, but all in the morning. There's 9 o'clock groups that meet, there are 10 o'clock groups that meet, but they were small groups, and they were groups that did the, online together, Wednesday night Bible studies, they were groups, you
Yeah.
belonged to the group type of thing.
And
So
so
it
the
made your
11
church
o'clock
small.
service is piped in.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
It was interesting.
For those of you who've come in more recently, we started out by looking at it
I gave everybody the schedule.
a little bit. We started out today with looking a little bit at just some highlights from a Pew Research study that indicates that by about 2070, less than half the people in the United States will identify as Christian.
I'm not sure that it's
And so-
not already that, but I can check the.
Well, what they found is that there are a lot of people who identify as Christian who are not going to church.
Yeah.
And so they still counted them. But what they're talking about is that by 2070,
Oh,
even that number of people who even identify as Christian will be below 50%.
yeah.
And so what does Binkley need to do to be prepared because it's getting harder and harder to get people to show up at church. And so how do we confront that? And
Well,
so
we
that's-
think of the evangelical church as being robust, but I think it's only like 20% of Americans. But I'm not sure. I can look about.
And according to them, they even,
And they're dropping.
even, they look like they're doing really well.
Mhm.
But what's really doing well is the mega churches. The run-of-the-mill evangelical churches are declining as well. Right? And so it's across the board that that just about every denomination is shrinking in terms of the number of people who actually show up to the church building, right? And so well, for what that's worth.
Do you know what they use to define a Christian?
People's own self-identification.
Okay.
They asked them a couple of questions. They asked them, one, if they were affiliated with the church, and then what do they consider themselves? Right? Do they consider themselves Buddhist or Christian or non-affiliated or nothing in particular, atheist, agnostic? So they had all those choices that people could choose. So one, they're answering about their affiliation, and then the other about their personal identification. Right? And so,
Well,
Yeah.
we're just behind Europe by a few decades.
yes, and they pointed that out
It
too.
happened there.
It happened there. Herman had a good point, though, that our history has been better than Europe because Europe had these religious wars. I mean, that happened. We haven't had that in the United States. And so that was a part of what drove the exodus in Europe too. People are just saying, this is no good. This doesn't help us, right? And so you have this huge exodus of the church. What?
The Holocaust.
Oh, yeah, the Holocaust, and all of that. And so you have some historical factors that happened in Europe that helped drive that exodus that haven't happened here. And so, but we're still, finally 30 years later, we're beginning to see a similar exodus. So we had, when we started, we said we were going to deal with two questions, and we kind of started dealing with the question of Baptist identification mixed in with this, but let's turn to that in particular in just a moment. What does the term Baptist mean, right? Well, Walter Sheridan, who wrote a book called Turning Points in Baptist History, had this comment in here. He said, Baptists differ today, and they did from their beginning in what they believe, how they worship, their attitudes toward other Christians, and their understanding of what is important in Christian discipleship. That pretty well covers the spectrum, doesn't it? Right? And so his point was, in one sense, nobody ever knew what it meant. You know, right? Because it was so broad in that you might walk into a Baptist church and an awful lot of them do look the same. You walk into some and you go, whoa, this is a Baptist church? Really? You know, and so
Like
there's
walking
this.
into Bentley.
Yeah, right. You walk into Bentley and you go like, what? This is, and so the fact that Baptist is in the name doesn't mean you can know what to expect when you walk in the door, because there's a tremendous difference. But public perceptions of that word, right, have shifted to mean one thing in particular. We're going to, at the end, say, if we decided to keep that term, what are we asserting, right? And there are, I think, three things that no matter what variety of Baptist you will agree on those. And we'll see if we agree with those, right, at the very end, right? But let's take a look here. The first churches to actually jettison the name Baptist, get rid of it, were not progressive churches, right? They were very conservative churches, right? And so this has been going on for over 30 years now. of churches either deleting Baptist from the name or starting a church and not indicating publicly that they are Baptist. And they are affiliated with American Baptist or Southern Baptist or the National Baptist Convention. They just don't put it in the name. Right. And so for about 30 years now, you've had this trend, but it started with very conservative churches deleting the word Baptist. Right. And so that may be interesting given how we think of that word now, that it was them that actually found the term problematic for their market. Right. And so this, by the way, is that's kind of a summary of part of what Bill Leonard have. Some of you know Bill Leonard. He's preached here in this church before, right? And he wrote a piece called "A Baptist by Any Other Name Would," right? And just said ... Right? And that's something that an argument that he made in that piece. And still in that same piece, he said, in 2023, centrist and left of center Baptist congregations are revisiting the Baptist name, given what they see as its increasing association in the public square with hard right theology, ethics, and politics. And so he ends up saying that shift of jettisoning the name that started out with very conservative churches has now moved to more progressive churches, and this is the reason. Right. And so we get a sense of why churches are doing this, right? So many churches with very different theological and social. I got screen cover.
Social
You want to click
orientation.
no
Social
thanks?
orientation.
You
Yeah.
Click no thanks there and get rid of
Yeah.
that.
Get rid of that.
There we go.
Okay. And social views have chosen to keep the name Baptist, though. And what are they asserting in doing that? So one is this notion of church autonomy. Binkley runs itself, right? We're affiliated with the American Baptist, and the name just went blank.
Alliance.
The Alliance of Baptists. Yeah, the Alliance of Baptists. So we're affiliated with both of those. But the Alliance of Baptists or the American Baptist can't say, Binkley, you have to do X, Y, and Z, right? The church is autonomous. It makes its own decisions. And so this is something that no matter whether you're at one of those fundamentalist Baptist churches or a very progressive Baptist church, it's just true for Baptists. That's the way we structure ourselves. Right. And so the local church is autonomous. It hires its own minister, right? It makes its own decisions about what is important, theologically, about what it's going to do. And so that local autonomy is a very Baptist thing. Now, it's not unique to Baptists. There are many other churches that operate that same way, but it is something that is definitive for Baptists.
So what is the
Right.
benefit of being called a Baptist if you're not?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
one of the things that
Mhm.
I've had the younger people tell me is they don't like religion.
Yeah. Mhm.
They're Christian, but they don't like religion. And,
Yeah.
and they identify with the
Yeah.
Baptists and the Catholics and all of these other names as being religion. And so
Yes, right.
if Binkley is autonomous, what is the benefit of calling themselves Baptist?
Yeah, well, one of the things that word Baptist tells you is that the church is autonomous, right? They all are that way. And so part of the value of that name is to assert that up front.
For people who understand that.
Yeah, for people to understand that's what you're getting into when you come here. And you may be getting into a church that's a fundamentalist church. You may be getting into one that's really liberal, right? But you're going to know that's an autonomous congregation and they make their decisions locally.
I think you know that,
Uh-huh.
and this is, I think, the critical thing. You know that if you understand enough about Baptists already,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But if
Now,
you're
I'm talking
driving
about
down
something-
15501, you don't know that.
Yes,
What
of
you
course.
know is you see Baptists and you think Southern Baptist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
And
exactly.
yeah, we're gonna get there in a minute too. Another thing though that is true for,
And just before we leave it, I don't know that I buy completely the church autonomy thing either. Because here we are fighting, what does Baptist mean?
yeah.
We didn't have that choice. That choice was made for us in the
Oh, for
public
sure.
square
For
about
sure.
what is Baptist.
Yes, in what I mean by autonomy is that there's no other organization above the church that dictates.
I understand.
But you're right, culturally, we're not autonomous, we're in that way.
And we did get, and there is,
Well,
and we did get booted from the.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. There you go.
Which
You
is
can't
something
really
to
tell
be
this
proud of.
story without.
Yeah.
You
Yes,
can't really tell this story without talking about what happened in the 1980s.
Yeah.
when the Southern Baptists became kind of
Oh, they took over, yeah.
yeah, and creedal.
yeah,
Because non-creedal is another aspect of being Baptist.
Yeah.
And freedom of belief.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, that was historically the case.
Yeah. And what I get think that at least what academic studies of these things mean by church autonomy is not that you can't get kicked out. You definitely can, but they can't close the church. You just keep going under a different, right, arrangement, right?
Also,
It's
like you own your own property, like the Methodists.
That's right.
split.
You own the building,
Yeah.
yeah, and so.
Nobody moves our pastors.
Yeah, right. And so that's what that means. And that's something you're gonna find across the board for Baptists. Another thing that you'll find pretty much across the board, and this is,
Can you admit, Maria?
oh, sure, I think.
Up at the top says admit.
Yeah,
It just says,
I can't,
yeah.
oh, wait, yeah, sorry.
this cursor's,
Okay.
Ah, sorry. There we go. Well, this one is a theological issue, and surprisingly, there's a theological issue that pretty much all Baptists, from the most fundamentalist to the most progressive, agree on, right? And that is that the relationship between a person and God is individual, right? That I'm in charge of my relationship with God. And so I do certain things, I live in a certain way that I believe is what God wants, right? And so I have that it's a personal thing. In many other churches, that's not the case. I mean, your relationship to the church is what determines your relationship to God. If you're faithful to the church, you come to church, then you're okay with God. But Baptists are okay with that thing of, that a person could maybe not come to church, but they're still Christian. Right? And so this is the soul competency thing.
Well, it's also called soul freedom.
Yes, yeah.
And, but I don't think that's true in these conservative Baptist churches anymore. Do you?
I think you have a mix of, they tell people it is,
Yes.
right? But then you have a really hard push to get them to believe the right things,
Oh, yeah.
but they would still frame it in terms of, it's all about you and what you believe and what you think, right? It's all you, right? And so it's something that pretty much the name Baptist implies that to people who grew up in the Baptist tradition. Now, out there, as you were pointing out, people driving down the highway, they have no idea about this, that no, but within the Baptist tradition, that's kind of an assumption that the real issue for spirituality is you and God, right? Now, you may have other people who help you, other people who support that, but you're not going to get kicked out of God's graces because you join a Methodist church.
But if you
Right.
don't agree with the way I
Yeah.
see God and how it just looks like
Yeah.
items 1 and 2 are not a part of a Southern Baptist
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
policy.
Well, they've definitely leaned more into, let me tell you what to believe,
Right.
definitely so.
And
But
if I
they'll
could
still
take
try to
love,
defend
you
that.
never really had
Anyway.
a problem.
Well, that's the history.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but in general, Protestantism has
Mhm.
the soul freedom, and
Mhm.
it's the Catholic Church that believes that the means of grace
Mhm.
comes through the
Mhm.
church.
Even,
I mean,
even,
there's Episcopal
Sure, sure.
churches,
yeah,
but
yeah,
they still don't, it's different than in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
The Means
I
of
have-
grace. comes
Sorry,
through.
I have gone to one more class, but I wanted, and I realized, so the personal competency,
Mhm.
then no wonder the churches make their own decisions. No wonder the churches are self-governing.
yeah,
And is,
Yeah.
and if they're part of a group, in other denominations, the denomination owns the property.
yeah.
That's not the
right.
case with
Right.
Baptists.
Right.
Yeah.
So if ideas change or sway, a Baptist church is free to just, well, I'm not gonna be part of your group anymore. I'm going over to this group because I'm more like
And
them
the
now.
group, even the association, has the right to say, you're not a part of our group anymore, but we can't close you down.
Yeah,
You go on, you're just not a part of our group. That's what happened to Binkley, right? That Southern Baptist said, no, you're not part of us anymore, right? And same thing with Saddleback Church in Texas. They said, no, if you're out of bounds. But those churches are still there and they're still going, right? And so there's nothing, they couldn't take the building away from them or fire their pastor or anything like that, right? The last thing is actually a practical thing, the way we baptize, right? And we're not the only ones who baptize by immersion.
Yeah, but it's not immersion, it's believers baptism.
Well, there's that too.
That's-
Yeah, believers baptism, but believers baptism is now, well, you're right, in Baptist origins, that was the key issue, but even before they agreed on baptism,
Right.
right? It was, the key issue was, you don't baptize somebody until they profess their faith,
Right.
right? And so you don't baptize children, right? Or babies.
Yeah.
Some of these big churches are baptizing children, but, but
Children's
when
one
the
thing.
child is old enough to say, I believe I want to be baptized, right? And so that was the key issue. And it still remains the case that we baptize people who profess their faith and say, I want to be baptized. We don't, yeah.
Interesting. I know
Yeah.
we do. I don't know about,
Yeah.
did Grace do immersion baptism? It does?
And so,
Otherwise,
yeah.
and everything.
Mhm.
So I guess what if you keep the name Baptist, now I'm not saying we have to do these things. I'm just saying if you keep the name Baptist from an internal side, not from the external, what does it mean to larger society, but from inside, right? You're kind of asserting these things, right? That's we baptize. I should put it that separately, actually.
Yeah.
Believers baptism.
Posit that we assert one other thing,
Yeah,
and that is some adherence to tradition.
yeah.
And I'm gonna say that's a good and a bad thing,
Yeah.
in that we
Yeah.
have all these things that we want to adhere to, that we believe in, that's great, but we're also stuck in this,
Oh, yeah.
we're stuck on baptism, and that means we're stuck with all the other weight
Yeah.
that baptism carries along.
Yes, right.
And
Yeah.
we're stuck with other traditions in our
And that's
service.
a
and-
great example.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Why do we do this? Well, that's the way Baptists have always done it, And
Wow.
so it's
I
the,
think you missed another one, which is non-creedal.
yes, there's another one. Yeah.
But
So
that-
this is not a comprehensive list. There are others. There were non-creedal. There is no confession of
Right.
faith.
I was always
say-
taught that you had to believe in the Bible and accept Jesus as your personal savior. Those are the only two requirements in Baptist.
Well, I would say those two are now have moved to, they're true in strong evangelical churches, not so much in some of the more progressive Baptist churches. There are people
Well,
who
no,
say, I don't.
we don't
Yeah.
necessarily ask those questions, but I'm just saying that's the traditional
Yeah,
Baptist is
Right.
that you have
historically,
soul
that
freedom,
has been,
soul
that was that was the, and I think the progressive churches have kind of moved, especially on the question of the authority of the Bible.
And even the
You know?
authority of the Bible wasn't necessarily literalism when I was,
Right.
now it is.
Yeah, now it is, has moved to there. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think the reason I use the word stigma is because there is that traditional that any and everybody who's walking around kind of have planted with the word Baptist. It's like, oh, those are the people that do this. When you say Catholic, oh, they're the people that do this.
Right.
The Methodist, oh, you're gonna go in there and hear hymnals. I mean,
Right.
it's that
Yes.
traditional that,
Yes.
that makes it more or less like, again, I come back to ask you, what are the benefits of using that word Baptist?
And I guess, so this is really about the history, the insight from an internal perspective.
Well,
That I'll,
one thing is that, Roger, oh God, what's his name, in Rhode Island, Roger Williams.
yeah,
I mean, that was the one colony where you could be of any faith.
yes.
So this was a strong stand of Baptists,
Oh, yes.
this openness.
Yeah.
And
And that is something that has historically been the case with Baptists, but fundamentalist Baptists have
Right.
very much rejected that
yeah, they've changed
and
that.
said, no, right? You have to be, and we will tell you what you have to believe, right? But yeah, historically, that was a hallmark of
Yeah.
Baptists, that you are personally responsible before God. I can't tell you what you have to believe.
And
Yeah.
there's another aspect that we can't leave out, which is the pension funds of the
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
that it's tied up in the pension funds and
Yeah.
the literature and so forth. I don't think we get much literature from the American Baptist Convention, but
Yeah,
traditionally that was the case. The Sunday
Yeah.
School Board, the missions,
Mission.
yeah,
and
right.
the
Yeah, you have those.
and the pension board and so forth.
Mhm.
So there's all those ties that if you're going to break away from, well, like, you don't have to call yourself Baptist, but if you're going to break away from the denomination, you lose
Yeah.
those services.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so if you're gonna break away from the denomination, and we had in this church we were pushed out, right? And so, but you do lose those things. And historically, that's really the reason that associations, state conventions, national Baptist convention, that's the reason they all started, is to produce exactly those things.
Mhm.
To produce literature, to produce, pension funds for
Economies of
pastors.
scale and
Right.
mission and literature production. and
Yes,
pension,
exactly,
all that.
exactly. And so those associations were created for practical reasons.
And they still exist, those
Yeah.
reasons still.
Yeah.
And so, Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we should just jump in on what do we think about calling
mhm.
Binkley Baptist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
You
give
know,
us background, what do
we were lucky enough to travel through Japan a while back, and we had this tour map, and it had all these swastikas all over the map.
oh my goodness.
And if you were walk down the street, occasionally you would see some swastikas carved into buildings. And, that was my expression too. It's like,
This in Japan, you said?
this is Japan. Yeah, what are these swastikas doing here?
Yeah.
And it turns out the swastika is an ancient religious symbol. These were all symbols of churches.
Right.
Yeah.
And, but still, I'm the person driving down 15501.
Right.
I didn't know that. To me,
Yeah, right.
I was shock and horror when I'm seeing these swastikas all over the map. I
Yes.
mean,
Yes, right.
you can try to educate people, but before you can do that, you have to interact with them. And if they're not interacting with you because of that,
Yes.
you've lost before you can.
Yes.
Right, you've lost
I agree.
it, yeah.
I agree.
You don't ever get the first foot in the door.
No.
And that's what, the thing that keeps coming to my mind is like the Black Lives Matter
Mhm.
gatherings. How many people have come up that are not familiar with Binkley? And, they're so surprised at what's
Yes.
going on. And the forum 2 weekends ago, or I guess it was last Saturday,
Yeah.
people that were interested in the topic that had never been to Binkley, a Baptist church is hosting this, about
Yes.
the environment and ethics,
Right.
there was like, they thought it was incongruent for some reason.
Yes,
You know,
right.
but And of course, they walk in the sanctuary and like you said, this is a Baptist church, you know? They driven by on 15501 and never looked twice
Yes.
after seeing that it was
Well,
a
I'm-
Baptist church. They never
Yeah.
had any interest in checking it out.
I never had any interest in checking it out because it said Baptist. And I've told the pastor this, it was
Yeah.
my Jewish boyfriend who said,
Yeah.
your Black Lives Matter is important to you, social justice and all these things, you should go check out Binkley Church. And I said, Binkley Church? And he said, yeah, it's right down the road, 15501. And I passed by and I saw the sign, I said, that's a Baptist church. And I walked in and I heard the pastor speak, and I said, that's the Baptist, I remember telling him, I said, right, you know what? Yes, it's a Baptist church.
Most people look at the building and say, is this a church?
Yeah.
Wow, I was shocked.
One thing I think we need to also bring in here is the African American Baptist Church, which is not Southern Baptist,
No,
but it's
Yeah.
it's very strong.
yes,
The
and
Baptist
has
tradition.
been, in terms of social issues, has been radically different from, when I say Southern Baptist, I mean inclusive of the Southern Baptist Convention and churches in the South, right? White churches in the South have not been typically very progressive, you know, and so.
And I think the reason that's the case is that because slave owners were Baptist, and so the
Yes.
African Americans formed the Baptist churches. I don't know.
That's how they were taught to be.
Yeah.
You were taught to be Baptist if you
Yeah.
were in the South. When we grew up, Baptist,
Yes,
Southern Baptist, we call
yes.
ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all we knew.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems to me like we all understand that there's this negative weight
There's
that
a
comes
negative.
with baptism.
Mhm.
So maybe, but I know that there's people in this church that don't want to let go of the
Yes,
Baptist name.
Right,
And I grew up Baptist. I don't want to let go either, but
Yeah.
I can't make an argument for having it on the sign. So what is
Yeah,
the
right.
argument that-
We had that issue, we were gonna put up a new sign outside, and we
Just-
never decided on it because.
Yeah.
But I mean, even I have trouble with Binkley because Binkley was always against gays. I mean,
Binkley.
the person that the
Oh,
church is
not the
named
church.
after.
Olin T. Binkley.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, the history can be complicated.
Yeah.
So I had a minor campaign to call it the Seymour League.
Seymour Lee.
Yes,
You know, listening to you, gosh, guys, there's a lot about history and
yeah,
so forth. If we change everything that history was
mhm,
and change the name and everything,
yeah.
then are we moving forward by embracing what was and recognizing that there was a problem with it? Or are we just changing everything and moving forward?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
making any sense.
Yeah, you are, because it.
'Cause I was trying to
I think
think of
it's
some
important
things
for us to
from-
deal with our
We
history.
have to do it.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
okay, do you take all of the statutes of the Confederacy and you just demolish everything?
Right.
Do we demolish our history, or do we take a look at our history and then actively and assertively make change?
Yeah,
Reflect that it's time for our history to change, not forget it.
I think we're actually here at Binkley, we do a fair amount of that. We look at our history, we say, we know there are problems there, right? How can we go forward and heal the wounds created by that history, right? And so I think that that is important, and it's an important thing of what we should be doing, right, as a church. I also know that there are people who drive by here and they see that name, and it doesn't mean that for them, right?
And you never get the opportunity to change their mind.
Yeah, and so we never get the opportunity to do that with them.
And you're
Yeah,
gonna
but
get
let's
older
say-
and
Yeah.
older and older
Yeah.
as a church because you're not gonna attract young people here.
Yeah, yeah,
I was a member of International Church of Las Vegas, which is a mega church.
yeah.
And when they started out, the pastor they have now took over in, I think it was like 2001. But prior to that, they were Assembly of God.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
And they were, and when I say Assembly of God, I mean Assembly of
Yes,
God.
right.
So here comes this North Dakota minister
Yeah.
that they brought in to the church. And he was like, well, where's my amen session? And they're all looking at him like,
Like, what are you talking
what's
about?
an amen session? And they kept going, he kept going with that, building off of that. He needed the people to free themselves of this weight that they carried around as an Assembly of God,
Yeah.
mournful kind
Yeah.
of, that he wasn't
Yeah.
ready for that. And 5 years later, I mean, his church is so diverse
Yeah.
in
Wow.
culture, race, everything,
Yeah.
because they walked away from this.
So they're no longer
Yeah.
members of
They
the
are no
assembly.
longer members of the
Wow.
assembly.
Yeah.
But they,
Yeah.
it was something that he walked in and he felt, he was coming from North Dakota. I was like,
Yeah.
you know, but he was looking for a little more head shaking, a little more clapping, a little more, yeah, you're right, Pastor,
Yeah.
real time. They were more mournful, and I went because it was what my husband grew up with. It was the type of church that so you sit there and you just kind of, okay, here's my hour of service and get on back out of there and go ahead and watch kind of thing. But once he got in there, I'd say 5 years later, that church was so turned around. It was like,
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know. You
Yeah.
know?
But they had to step away from
Yes,
this.
they did.
I mean, we have to think about
Because then they got
what does
came
being
in.
Baptist do right for us? What is it?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
Despite that, what does it do
Yes.
positive?
Yeah. And I think that, yeah.
A lot of these denominations came into being during, the Protestant Reformation and so forth. And, in a sense, a lot of them don't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
All these hundreds of different denominations. My brother's church in Atlanta is like 10,000 people and they have their own mission.
Mm.
They have their
Yeah.
own missions
Yes.
to different parts. So I guess they're like a denomination in themselves.
Yeah.
And if you're independent, why not be?
Well, I mean, those economies of scale do still play a role.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, in pensions for ministers, in
Oh, yeah.
production of literature, in mission work. It would be hard for us as a church to do all the things we want to do by ourselves.
But
So,
you have to ask yourself, do you need to do all those things?
well, I think we do want our ministers to have pensions.
Well, I know, but you
We do need literature and
there
Others
was-
that have to develop pension capabilities. And
Well, let me go to
invest-
missions for a second, because, there's missionary Baptist churches because they believed in missions.
Right.
And there were Baptist churches that didn't believe in missions, so they weren't missionary Baptist churches. I mean, it's all these things that.
My dad was a Southern Baptist pastor, and he was very much a missionary Baptist, And so he would see it as a goal when he goes to a church, they're giving X percent to missions,
Right.
that he would see it as tremendous success if in 5 years he had doubled that.
Right.
And so that was a huge part of his version of Baptist.
And then there was like, what is missions? Does it mean getting people to be saved by believing in Jesus, or is it?
Building
Head
homes.
Or
counts.
is it
Head counts.
working on- Yeah, is it working on housing or food
Yeah.
or agriculture or whatever, so. Yeah,
I was
It's very
looking up as far as growth though, the Latter-day Saints and Mormons they're still growing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was also looking, and Muslim churches are still growing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Not all religion is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not.
so I mean, it's a strange phenomenon is that, we want to kind of break from tradition, but the ones that are growing are the ones that are really
Exactly.
hard into the tradition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
I
in
went
many ways.
I attended the Ramadan Interfaith Dinner,
Mhm.
and it was at the Episcopal Church in Chapel Hill. And they mentioned during this dinner, and I'm new here, how this was always done at Binkley Baptist Church.
Oh, really?
And I thought, yeah,
I didn't
They,
know
they
that.
said that during
Yeah.
this thing, right? I was
Yeah.
sitting in the session. But what was beautiful about it, it had people from all faiths.
Yeah.
Didn't matter what the title was, that this was a
Mhm.
Muslim group sharing with you what it means to experience Ramadan. And
Yes.
and they explained about the hunger and what it means and why we do it. So it was beautifully done. And I thought, it doesn't matter if we call ourselves Baptists, as long as it's not the, this is us, it's more of a, and this is us. Interfaith people of all types of, and I know I've heard the pastor say it, all people, all, no matter what their background, everybody feel comfortable here. And by the way, yeah, and we're Baptists, because then that's now
Yeah.
taking the old tradition and shaking it up
Yeah.
and saying,
Mm.
this is what our history was, but this is what our history will be. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe, something that would fit is, that way of looking at it would be what you mentioned that we tried once, but of making a new sign and just taking the word off the sign. Right. And so, but then you're not, rejecting
Right,
affiliation.
right.
It's just for those people who have no idea and are driving by, and we don't want them to form, to identify us as a fundamentalist church,
Yeah.
Yes.
right?
But the banners they've been down now, I guess probably because of the sidewalk construction.
Yeah.
The banners have kind of
Yes, they have.
been helpful, I
Yeah,
think, in saying,
I agree.
but, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. and
these
I-
things are important to us.
Yeah, and I think that I like the fact that we had our church sign, and then you could see in the backdrop, the Black Lives Matter sign, that says, this is not typical.
That was my view when I rode on 15, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But why have to fight that?
Huh?
I mean, why,
Why do we have to
this,
fight
this
that?
counteracts that? Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, it's all in our control. Why?
Yes, right.
counteract it? I would, my personal view, and I know others disagree, is I would take the Baptist out of it. I would at least take it off the sign, but I would take it out of the name completely.
Yeah.
I think it's disingenuous to take it off the sign and not take it out of the name.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring out, the next session is Christianity the one true religion? How should Christians relate to other
Yeah,
religions?
well, so next week, we will go to that, the exclusivity,
Christian exclusive.
Christian exclusivism, yes. And there is in the Bible, there is one verse, right, that is a real stumbling point for anybody who takes the Bible really seriously, in which Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one will come unto the Father but by me, right?
Yeah.
Well, that one place has been the foundation of a view of,
But I think
I'd say
in
that
1 John
you have to be a Christian, or you can't be okay with God, right?
Yeah, that's
So we're
the
gonna
key.
look at that next week, right?
You're not gonna give us anything right now?
Well, we'll let Herman give it to us. He's in charge next week.
Can I ask you to, in 1 John, it says you'll be cast into the fire. So-
Yeah, right.
Herman, do you mind also looking at some other faiths? And like, I know Muslims have some tradition, some Muslim traditions have issues with other faiths, and
Yes.
because I think that's less a problem for our community when we go out to other churches in the area than for them. But
Yeah,
I'm
it's
glad
true.
they're,
Yeah, it's true. We're not the
Muslims
only
talk
ones
about
that,
infidels.
you
I
know,
mean, that's part of Muslim Islam.
and it's
Jewish has some-
there's a broader issue of religious exclusivism
Right.
that you find within all of the major religions. You find versions of them that say you have to be us or you're out.
I mean,
Our group and group and our group, yeah.
Part of the
We had
reason,
that conversation.
Yeah.
Just this morning.
Yeah.
part of the reason that people leave churches is they say religion does more harm than good.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
And that's that issue
So I'll
is a
bring-
big
I'll
part
deal
of
with
that harm.
This is
Yeah.
fantastic.
You'll get all the answers next week.
Well, we're all holding you, we're waiting for it, Herman.
It comes down to not so much religion as it does faith.
Yes.
Mm.
If if you're based on a faith and not traditions and,
Mhm.
you know, service for in religion, then, you're meeting, the needs of more people.
Yeah.
So can I just give you a point that we argued about this morning? And
Yes,
hopefully you'll
please.
bring up?
Yeah,
So part of our discussion was,
you argue.
And we have to
Oh,
walk away
all the time.
agreeing to
Yeah, we do.
disagree.
so part of the discussion was, I don't want to say who believes what, but.
We're not gonna settle
We're
this
looking-
here.
yeah. Is the Bible the word of God? Or is the Bible the word of men who were inspired by God? And so even if they had, the Spirit led them to write things, could man himself who wrote it have some aspect of the man in the writing? Or is
Did
purely
it
the word of
have-
God?
But you missed
Their
that
context.
lesson.
Yeah, we actually did that.
Maybe it's recorded.
I'm so sorry, I just discovered.
Is that recorded? We can go back and play it?
It's on YouTube.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to you.
No, well, okay, well, I'll talk about that.
That was a good discussion, and it's not over.
It's not over.
Oh,
Well, I think these classes, we never get to the end of the class and we've solved the issue. What we've done is talk about a process, say, how do we go on from here, you know? And I think that issue of the name is one that has come up in this church a number of times before. It's, for now, it's there, right? I don't know that it will always be there, but.
It's surprisingly contentious.
It is,
I
yeah,
mean,
surprisingly contentious, yes.
In part, we're being true Baptists. We're saying you can be in this church and you can have doubts. You can,
Yes,
you know, you
yes,
don't have to be
right.
orthodox. Right?
Yeah, well, that's true. We are being very true to the historical version of that Baptist notion that you are the person who makes those decisions.
So
And you may
guys
not
have
agree with me.
Resolved anything, you just talked about.
No,
Well, really, it's a commitment to respecting the person's autonomy as a human being, that I don't get to force on you my way of looking at it.
Yes.
Right.
well, we've resolved, I mean, if we have a position, it's that, you know, biblical literalism doesn't really make sense. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
But we can talk about that a little bit too.
we can, yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, I teach diversity and inclusion, well, at least I did until the
Oh my
last
gosh.
class just went real wild. But it's, what I try and do in teaching it is, let's have the conversation. You never
Right.
talk about it. Even if you
Right.
don't resolve anything here, can we at least
Yeah.
have a conversation?
Yes,
So something is in your mind, and next time you see this issue or talk about it, you're gonna think about it.
yeah, there's something healthy about that.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
these are classes, guys. I really wish I could have been
Well, they are on that Binkley YouTube channel.
I'm going big time today. All right.
Thank you, Michael.
So
Thank you,
much.
Herman.
This is great. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.